Okay, well, welcome to this evening's Corporate and External Issues Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Richard Sylvester, the chair of the committee. It's a new municipal year. I want to welcome all of the members of the committee and the officers and to the public viewing this committee meeting online. The first item of business is declarations of interest. Could I ask members in the chat box to indicate if they have any declarations of interest? None have been expressed. Therefore, we go to item number 2, which is urgent business. Is there any urgent business?
There isn't, no, Chair.
Thank you. Any apologies for absence?
I haven't received any.
No. So therefore we go to item number 4, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. This was the meeting held on the 13th of February earlier this year. I wasn't a member of the committee. It was Councillor Peel who was the chairman and Councillor Hornby was the vice chairman. Members should have received a copy of these minutes. First of all, has anybody got any issues on the minutes or wish to raise anything on the minutes at all from February? Please indicate in the chat box if you have, if you wish to raise anything on the minutes. Can't see that anybody has indicated. Councillor Hornby has moved approval. Therefore, could members indicate in the chat box if they approve the minutes? If you accept the minutes, please. If you can indicate if you accept the minutes. Thank you, members, for accepting those minutes. So therefore we go on to item number 5, which is our main presentation for this evening, which is Bolton's humanitarian response. And this will be presented by Phil Rimmer. Phil.
Thank you very much. What I would like to do really is give you an overview of our response over the last 4 months to the pandemic and the way we've supported residents in Bolton through that period. Hopefully you'll all be familiar with the orange banner on screen at the moment, which is present on our website and advertises our helpline number and our opening times. Callum, could you move to the next slide, please? So the reason we set our humanitarian response up is to support our most vulnerable in Bolton through this period. There are many residents in Bolton that have needed to isolate for many different reasons. We've got close to 15,000 in Bolton that are extremely clinically vulnerable, but we also recognise with other people at home due to losing work, taking unpaid leave, looking after children and family, financially vulnerable or struggling with health and well-being. Next slide, please, Callum. So our response was very much a collaborative approach. This is by no means an exhaustive list. It's to give a flavour of some of the services and organisations that were involved in delivering our response. Next slide, please, Callum. And again, this is by no means exhaustive. This is an overview of some of the organisations that have been involved in helping us to deliver support to residents across Bolton. As you can see, a very wide range of organisations, some that directly feed into our humanitarian group and other community organisations that have been organised through the CVS. Next slide, please, Callum. Just to give some assurance really of the governance around how we've managed this over the last 4 months. So we feed information through the corporate leadership team and through executive members. There is a Greater Manchester Humanitarian Assistance Group that meets every week that I dial into, and quite a lot of the information through that group feeds into our Bolton Humanitarian Assistance Group that I chair. We have a coordination and triage team headed by Lisa Helens from Public Health, who also manages our response hub. We have a data cell managed by Dave Hashdy, food cell, Dave Bagley and Raf Martinez, our contact centre managed by Dawn Holton, CVS, Darren Knight and Helen Tomlinson, and we also have a representative from the CCG, Hannah Carrington, who's a mental health project worker. Next slide, please, Callum. Just very briefly, the process for supporting people. Most of our contact comes via our helpline and through the web. The contact centre sits very much in the middle of that process. Depending on the need that is presented by the residents, we then hand off to various organisations and services that deal with that need. What you'll notice in the green box is that as well as receiving calls in through the helpline, we also have made outbound calls to shielded residents, and in a couple of minutes I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. Next slide, please, Callum. I think one of the important things to mention is that we are effectively at the moment, and have been since March, running our contact centre from home. So all our staff are actually dealing with those calls in their own houses. I think under normal conditions that would be quite challenging, but some of the calls that they've had to take and some of the support that they've had to offer, I think has been particularly challenging. So I think it's a testament to those staff how well they've dealt with that. But I think it's fair to say that they've also found that a very rewarding experience. So on the main slide deck I've sent through, there are some more examples of that for you. Next slide, please, Callum. Not to forget as well that we've also had staff from our contact centre based in the town hall as well, and so obviously they've been providing that support through this period in addition to the staff working from home. Next slide, please. So one of the things we've been keen to do is capture customer feedback. I'm pleased to say that the majority of that has been complimentary, but I think the reason this is important to us is so that we can continue to design the way we provide that support. So we've been really keen to capture what customers have said about their experience in terms of accessing that support. Next slide, please. I think if you was to sum up the presentation in one slide, this is probably the slide we'd use, and thanks to Andy Witkowski from the comms team who's put this together for us. And what this does in a snapshot really is provide the, excuse me, the humanitarian response in numbers. This obviously will be an ever-changing picture, so this is very much a snapshot in time, but this will be something we can use in future publications and something we can probably provide over the website as well at some point. Next slide, please. I mentioned very briefly at the beginning the response hub. I think what's particularly impressive about this team is this is a group of staff that have never worked together before. So this team was set up very quickly back in March, headed up by Lisa Helens, and those staff have been absolutely incredible. They tend to deal with the more complex cases. So once we fulfill basic needs such as food and medication deliveries, this team will actually deal with much more serious issues around mental health, well-being and various other issues that are presented. Next slide, please. So again, we've captured customer testimonials as part of that process. And again, I have to say that the feedback from the customers that we've dealt with has been quite emotional at times, you know, to see the impact that that team has had on people's lives during the last 4 months. Next slide, please, Callum. We couldn't have done this without the involvement of the CVS. They've been absolutely invaluable to this process for us, and we've got a whole range of community organisations throughout the last 4 months that have done incredible work out in the community. 26 mutual aid groups that have set up in response to the pandemic, and they've been doing a whole range of things from shopping for people, looking after pets, you name it, they've done it. And again, without that, we wouldn't have been able to provide the support we provided. Next slide, please, Callum. Urban Outreach, most of you maybe will know Dave Bagley, who's the Chief Executive of Urban Outreach, so he's given us a quote there to sum up his experience of this process. But basically, Urban Outreach have been providing our central food offer through the Central Food Bank. Next slide, Callum, please. And again, these numbers are very much a snapshot in time, and so these numbers will certainly be higher now. But I think what's most impressive about this particular slide is, again, the organisations that have supported us. So you can see from this slide that Greg's, Green Ulches, Cars and Warburton's, we've taken anything that's been an offer, to be honest. If there's been an offer of food, we've accepted it. Cars in particular provided us with a freezer unit that again was invaluable, and the type of food we could take in and provide as a range to our customers. Next slide, please, Callum. So the next 3 slides I'm going to go through very quickly. This one basically just outlines how we've provided our food offer. Next slide, Callum. This one is gas and electric support that we provided through local welfare provision. Next slide, please, Callum. And then our medication support, which has been mainly delivering medication to people's houses. Next slide, please. And then one of the things we picked up when we were speaking to our customers was the number of them that needed further support because of isolation. And so that was delivered in the form of weekly contact calls that were provided through our library staff. And one of our library staff, Laura, has provided her experience over the last few months, and also a befriending service that's been coordinated by Bolton CVS. Next slide, please, Callum. In particular, we were worried about our shielded cohort because we know that they were a group of people that literally couldn't leave the house, and so we were really keen to make sure they had the right support in place. Next slide, please, Callum. And the way we did that, and again, this has been invaluable to the process, is by managing the data that came through from central government. So data cell headed up by Dave Hashty, and they've crunched that data so that we can start making outbound calls to customers. Next slide, please, Callum. And this is the last slide, and this really just gives you a little bit of information about our outbound calling campaign. So we contacted or attempted to contact 14,391 residents, which are all of our shielded list effectively. We managed to speak to nearly 11,000 of those. We then took the other 3,000, whittled that down to about 400 through various other cross checks, and we are in the process of doing welfare visits for those residents. So we're actually going out knocking on doors and making sure those people are okay. And a very quick final point, just launched today, is a second outbound calling campaign, which is based on data that's just been sent through by central government. And an example of that is people that are no longer getting the government food parcel but haven't registered for a priority supermarket slot through DEFRA. So we'll be phoning those customers and again making sure that they're getting the support that they require. And that's it, thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was a very comprehensive presentation, a lot of information there. Thank you very much to all of your staff for doing what you're doing. You've had to do this in a very, very short space of time. I just think it's fantastic what you've achieved and are achieving. I've got 2 members who have indicated that they wish to speak, so I will take them in order. If any other members wish to speak, type into the box to speak. First of all, I'm going to take Councillor Paul Heslop. Councillor Heslop.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions, Phil. Can you see me? I can't see you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned that it was going very well. There were a couple of hiccups. Were there anything that was identifiable from the contact centre that of particular challenges that you were then able to address? And if there were, can you give us details about that? And the second issue was there any social fund for cash payments, and was this increased during the current the COVID virus situation? Have we had funds, and have they been distributed in the form of cash payments to any residents?
Yeah, so in answer to the first question, I think probably the greatest challenge we had was in terms of the data. Because, well, and I think the government obviously struggled with this as well, in fairness, because they were holding information that was probably quite old and out to date. So one of our biggest challenges through the contact centre was when we tried to contact the 14,000 shielded, we weren't able to get answers from 3,000 of those people. Now, understandably for us, that was a worry because we wanted to make sure those people were okay. So the challenge was how we basically compared that data across various other systems and with GPs. And as I say, we managed to reduce that down to 400 cases that we're now doing welfare visits on. So I think the biggest challenge really was making sure we reached all of those people, particularly in the shielded group, who we had particular concerns about. In terms of the social funds, so in Bolton we're very lucky to have a very generous local welfare provision scheme with a very generous budget. In fact, I think we've got the largest budget probably in Greater Manchester. And so a lot of support came through our local welfare provision offer, particularly the gas and electric offer came through that team, as well as food support for people that were financially vulnerable. So I think there were two particular groups of people we were helping with food, people who couldn't access the food but could afford it. And we just had to really support them in terms of getting supermarket slots or maybe doing the shopping for them. And then another group that was financially in financial difficulty that we supported through our local welfare provision scheme. We don't give cash awards, and that is a debate that's going on across Greater Manchester at the moment, with most authorities basically saying that there are concerns about giving cash awards. So we've tended to provide goods and services as part of our offer rather than cash.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Phil. Now I'll take Councillor Nick Peel, who has indicated. Councillor Peel.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, brilliant presentation, Phil. Thank you for that. And I've been one of those councillors who's been quite privileged to attend the Recovery Board since we started, and so was very much aware of the really good work that's been going on. So I think that just does need stating quite loudly and clearly how proud we should all be in Bolton by the tremendous work that's gone on. And I think the fact that Bolton has had such well developed and mature partnerships that have built up over many years really helps us hit the ground running. We already have those relationships in place with the voluntary sector and our key partners, and I think that's made a big difference. I mean, that's anecdotal. I've certainly not studied other towns and what their experiences are, but I think if we did really look into that, I think we would find that we did hit the ground running. And by no means has it been an easy task, but I think because of those strong partnerships, we certainly did make it easier for ourselves. And a comment and a question, really. I think my comment is really that I'm aware that there's no immediate plans to stop the humanitarian hub. I think that's the right call, and that's the right decision. I think the humanitarian hub needs to go on for as long as it needs to go on. The future with COVID and with the confusing myriad of restrictions is going to be with us for a long time. But I think there's also a strong argument developing, really, whereby what we have in place with the humanitarian hub could almost be a new business model for how we look after the vulnerable, utilising the voluntary sector in the future. Because when the call to arms went out, you know, there was a whole range of people who responded to that. I did it myself and really thoroughly enjoyed, you know, going shopping for people. It was something I hadn't done before, and I think Darren Knight would certainly agree with this, that there is an untapped resource in our community who do want to do their bit. And so I think we don't get rid of it in a hurry. And I think even after, when all this is over, we look at this as a business model for offering and delivering help to vulnerable people for the future. I think we've really learnt some great lessons. My question, Phil, is in terms of the shielding cohort, and again it comes back to the mixed and confused messaging that's come from Bolton, which I believe has been the main reason for fluctuating and upward trend infection rates in parts of the country. They've been told, unless the message has been changed again, but they've been told they no longer have to shield from today. I suspect that many will continue to do it. My question is, what contingencies do we have in place for people who are continuing to shield? Hopefully we didn't plan for a drop off in services, and also for people who there may be an upsurge in calls to our contact centre for advice from this very vulnerable and frightened group. And the third element to that is, I saw something on the news the other day, and for many people it's almost like being released from prison. There's a psychological impact to suddenly the authority saying you can go outside now when before they couldn't. So all of that wrapped up, do we foresee a particular challenge there with the shielding groups? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think one of the things we did not last week, the week before, is we took the decision to text and send letters to all the shielded cohort again, to basically tell them that obviously we were aware that the rules were changing from the 1st of August for the shielded, but that we were still there to provide support, and we gave them the helpline number again. So we have actively promoted that to the shielded group prior to the 1st of August. We have seen a bit of an upsurge in calls. We've been averaging probably 20 to 25 calls through the helpline per day. We got 50 calls through the helpline on Friday. So very early days, but a sign maybe that we are going to get more calls coming through. The helpline is managed through our main contact centre, and I think one of the advantages of the contact centre being based at home at the moment is we've actually found additional capacity as a result of that, and so we're quite confident that we can manage the numbers coming through the helpline even if they were to go up, fairly significantly. And equally, our response hub, although a couple of staff have gone back to the substantive roles, we have still very much got that response hub in place dealing with those more complex cases. I think where the pressure comes, and I think it comes back to the point that you made at the very beginning, is our voluntary sector. So if you speak, for example, today, Bagley, he'll say that he can get access to food and he can buy food if he has the funding to do that. But then you have to have the volunteers and the transport to get that food out into the community. And then equally with the community groups that have been organised through the CVS, it's the same challenge that some of those organisations may struggle if we had a real upsurge in the way that we did when we first went down into lockdown. I think that may be a challenge, but I am quietly optimistic that with the structures we've got in place at the moment, that we will be able to tackle an increase.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Councillor Peel, for your question and comments. We now have a question from Councillor Julie Pattinson. Councillor Pattison.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that. First of all, Phil, can I just give, I can't give enough praise for what you and the guys have done during this journey. I really can't. I've been lucky enough to be part of the journey in terms of delivering food parcels and also putting referrals through to yourselves. And you've been on the ball considering. My question is, though, however, is I do think you're selling yourself a bit short, because no matter where the pathway has come from, whether that be Bolton at Arms, Bolton Nice, Homeless UK, as we've mentioned, there have been many organisations out there. At the end of this, will you be looking to get a true picture of full stats data on just how well we did handle this crisis?
Yeah, I think the reason we put the presentation together and what we want to do with this presentation is add to it as we move along, because we're by no means out of the woods, I think, as we're all aware, with the things that have happened over the last few days. So what we will be doing is we'll be adding to the presentation. We monitor our data very closely, so we can get hold of daily updates, weekly updates. So we track all the information that comes through both the helpline and through the response hub. So we will have a wealth of data at the end of this, which I think will give us a lot of valuable information about the group that we've supported. One thing I would say, which maybe again might offer a little bit of comfort, is that when we contacted the shielded, and as I say, we spoke to over 11,000 of them, only probably around 5% of those people needed support. What we found is that a lot of those residents already had support in place. I think where the risk was if the people who were providing that support became ill with COVID-19 and could no longer provide that support to those residents. And I think that's where the risk still is moving forward. But as I say, the reassuring news is that a lot of those residents did have that support in place. And I'm hoping that continues to be the case as we move forward.
And again, you know, you've done an absolutely fabulous job. I know we're not out of the woods yet, but considering it just come out of the blue and it was sprung on us, I think the way that it's been handled is absolutely excellent. So fair play. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Councillor Pattison. Now we go to Councillor Madeline Murray. Councillor Murray.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Oh, brilliant. I was waiting for a light for some reason. I want to be a bit more, well, it's not that anybody hasn't been practical, but I'm desperate to know how you came to have a shielding register, how people got on the register. Was it age or health reasons? And I am concerned because I'm in a vulnerable age group, and probably I wouldn't ask for help. So have we got some contingency plans in place for the elderly and infirmed who wouldn't actually ask for help? And I would expect, I know everybody said how wonderful the staff was. I wouldn't have expected anything different, having spent 17 years at Bolton Council, because they're marvellous, the staff. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the shielded data, that was pulled together by central government and coordinated through the GP surgeries. And so we obviously were not involved in putting together that shielded list. It was effectively anybody that was termed as extremely clinically vulnerable. So that would cover a whole range of different health issues that put them onto the shielded list. Then what they were able to do is register for support through central government, so they could register for a government food parcel, and that was delivered weekly to those shielded residents that needed it. What we've also done as part of our response, we did a mail shot probably about 2 months ago now to all households across Bolton. And we've also put information in other Bolton publications, because we absolutely recognise that this isn't just about that shielded cohort. It's about other people that find themselves in vulnerable situation as a result of the pandemic. So the support offer is open to absolutely any resident in Bolton, not just the shielded list. So although we've done some targeted mail shots and text into that shielded cohort, we have also done mail shots to the whole of the borough, and if need be going forward, we will look at doing that again. We also work very closely through our humanitarian assistance group with Age UK and other organisations such as Senior Solutions, who have particularly been supporting some of our older residents. And what we found with our older residents is the main issue is getting access to the food, as I say, not the fact they can't afford it, the fact that they can't get access to it. And that's the reason why we've been providing shopping for people and organising online supermarket slots. So it's a wide offer to all residents across the borough.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Councillor Murray. The Leader of the Council, Councillor David Greenhouse, has indicated that he wishes to speak. So we're going to go over to Councillor Greenhouse, Leader of the Council.
Thanks, Councillor Sylvester. It'd be very remiss of me if I didn't pay equally the tribute to the team who have been phenomenal throughout all this. I can't praise them enough in all they've done at every level, and there have been challenges, as some have been highlighted, particularly around in the early stages. The data, getting all that shielding cohort was challenging. I think we all know when we're dealing with health data, that has always been a bit of a challenge over the years, and certainly the original letters right at the start didn't get out as soon as predicted, but the team responded phenomenally. I want to just take up what Councillor Pattison said, actually, because I think when I saw the original chart there of the humanitarian response and it said 200 plus volunteers, I think that should say plus, because we all know there have been huge numbers of volunteers out in communities, real unsung heroes that have delivered and befriended and done shopping, collected medication, not always gone through the official channels, but have just been willing to step up on community pages and deliver. We call it the humanitarian response, but it was just like, you know, what we call a Bolton family response to one another, helping people out. And I think, you know, that honestly, I think that figure does get well into 4 figures when we actually come and accumulate that number across the board. And I accept the challenge that Councillor Murray has just said as well, because it was incredibly challenging when we have a particularly digital agenda in communication to contact a cohort that would be predictably in their 80s and 90s, less technically with it, as it would say. I mean, I'm nowhere near that, and I'm less technically with it. So I think it was hugely important, and that, of course, we did the very, you know, the Team Bolton magazine, which listed all the help that was available in every sector. I think it was hugely important that went out to every household in the borough. With every helpline you could imagine for every feature, the humanitarian help, medication, befriending services, any help whatsoever, all the useful numbers were there. And it was important we did back up, not just rely on social media to reach that very difficult to reach cohort, and very proud cohort who don't like often to reach out and say they need help. And we found some really anecdotal, I'm sure as we get through this, we'll try and get them all down in writing, and some wonderful examples which stem from people who had not wanted to reach out, but where we could really provide that help and support that was so crucial. So I'll just finish by saying really well done to the team, really proud of all of them, the way they've responded to the new way of working, but also to all those organisations that have come together and deliver this great response. Thanks. Thank you very much, Councillor Sylvester.
Thank you, Leader. I don't have any other members indicating that they wish to speak. If any member does wish to speak, could they type in the box "speak" now? No other members have indicated that they wish to speak. However, this pandemic has certainly had a effect on the Borough Council, and our Borough Treasurer, Sue Johnson, is going to go through a short presentation now on the financial consequences of COVID-19. Borough Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. So good evening, members. Obviously, one of the huge asks of this council has been the financial impact that COVID has and will continue to have for the future. So a short presentation from myself just to update members on the position so far. As of today, we have received £20 million of what is entitled emergency government support, and this is the money that has been passported through very quickly in 3 payments from central government to support additional cost, loss of income, cash flow issues. We are doing now monthly returns back into MHCLG, just on the data of what our costs have been, in which areas, loss of income, etc. And they are currently saying and it is in, caveated, a return to normal from the 1st of August. And I think by that, what they are saying is that as businesses start to reopen, as people start to go back to work, we anticipate a change in the financial pressures, but obviously it is very early days and the figures will change, which is why the 3rd bullet point on this slide, the full year effect of our estimate around costs, loss of income and any unachieved savings, it is an estimate. The figures in this presentation are at the end of June. We are now starting to look at the 1 month further to the end of July, but I have to say that, estimated is underlined for a reason. These figures will change as we further understand the impact on the council's finances of the current situation. So we could go to the next slide, please, Callum. So in terms of additional costs, At the end of June, we were looking at about £13 million. Now, there's a whole mix of things in there. Not surprisingly, adult social care is top of the pack. Not only just over £1 million that we have incurred directly as a council that falls within our accounts, but in addition to that, we've been able to passport 2.4 million through to the CCG to access NHS funding, and also we've had a separate infection control grant, which again has allowed an additional £2.3 million worth of monies to spend directly on infection control. And that's not just within the council, but importantly within care settings across the borough. Of course, additional expenditure in public health, an enormous amount of work being done by that department at the moment. So 100,000 direct costs into that department, but again, we have also received £2 million grants specifically for the track and trace activities that are now required. We've also seen pressures in housing, in culture. A lot of that is loss of income, obviously, you know, Albert Hall's a classic example. And corporate costs and ICT, obviously, we've got a lot of costs around communications with all the extra effort that's gone, you know, quite rightly into getting the messages out to our residents, but also in ICT. You know, we go to the beginning of March, the majority of office staff were based, you know, Town Hall, Paderborn. Come the end of March, most of our staff were at home and are continuing to work. But that comes with some cost, not only in equipment, but a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that we have the capacity, the bandwidth, the security in place to make sure that our staff can work safely and securely from home. Our data is still safe. And then the final bullet point, again, that is something that will change. So as we got into this financial year, we were halfway through a 2-year budget strategy. We knew we still had savings to get out across the council. This is almost our worst case scenario position if the pandemic does not allow us to get our savings cuts coming out by the end of this financial year. To give members reassurance, that figure will definitely change. There is an enormous amount of work going on behind the scenes to get reports ready, to reassess options, to get those savings out. But obviously, in terms of the information that goes back into government, that is a cash flow hit. So our costs are still higher than they would have been had those savings not come out. Hence, it goes on the return and reporting it this evening. So the next slide, please, Callum. Even more significant than the cost we face is our loss of income. The airport, it's been in the news, hasn't it, around Manchester Airport. We are a minority shareholder along with other Greater Manchester authorities, and the airport is unable to pay any dividend both in this year and in the foreseeable future for very obvious reasons. But in addition to that, we have also made loans into the airport, and for a short-term basis they will also not be able to repay those loans, yearly repayments to us. Now that is just a cash flow hit, again to give members reassurance that any repayment of loans will be repaid, so we can accrue it in our accounts. We just take the hit on cash flow for the short time that the airport is unable to pay that, but obviously the dividend will be a longer term hit for us. Unsurprisingly, we are also seeing in the early part of this year a reduction in the value of both business rates that we are collecting and council tax. The council tax figure, there's a combination there of what we are seeing in terms of non-payment, so people either not paying their bill or cancelling the direct debit payments, but also an increase in local council tax support. So residents in the borough who, because of their financial situation, are entitled to local council tax support, pay the first 12.5% of their bill, but nothing further. That is picked up by the council under the local council tax support scheme. But obviously it is a genuine loss of income to the council, and we are, you know, understandably seeing more residents now coming to us and they are able to claim that council tax support. And then obviously there are other sales fees and charges that we make as a council, and that is our estimated loss of income. Now the government has recently said that they will support councils beyond the first 5%, budgeted 5% for our sales fees and charges, they will look to support us to a value of 75% of that figure. So we are just looking at, you know, the returns going in, the information they want, so we await confirmation of the value that will give us. But obviously, you know, that is really good news. It's more money coming back into the council to help support our budget in this year. So in total, what that means is that to balance our budget for the current financial year for the impact of COVID, we will be looking to use reserves of around about £9 million. Now that's on top of what we'd already planned to use as a council to balance our budget whilst we're getting our budget strategy figures out, and on top of any reserves that we will need to balance any demand pressures within the council as well, which is why it's really important that we now keep a very close eye on the finances and make sure that we are getting out our savings as quickly as we can, and we also welcome any government funding, which is obviously we've already had the 20 million, and the next slide will give us more. Just to make the point, the final bullet point here is that the impact of the business rates and the council tax loss of income falls into subsequent financial years. It's a quirk of local government accounting in how we have to deal with any losses in that. And there was some really good news on that a couple of weeks ago, because what the government have announced is that rather than that having to be caught up in the accounts next financial year, we can spread it over the next 3 financial years, which will help enormously in mitigating the impact of this situation when we come to set the council's budget in February of next year. So we just go to the final slide, please, Callum. So other funding. So, I mean, this is the good news slide, really. There is one around the money. Grants to businesses. There has been a huge effort by the team in getting the money out to local businesses. It was a scheme set by the government. They set the criteria. So it was quite restrictive. Not everybody was able to benefit from this, but for those that were, we have paid the initial scheme. There was just over 5,000 businesses, and we got £57.5 million out to them. Then a further discretionary scheme. Again, I think probably 200-300 businesses impacted by that. Again, another £2.9 million out to local businesses, and we've had some really good feedback around, you know, without this money, I wouldn't be here. Really welcome. And then, as I've mentioned through the presentation, we've had other grants for specific purposes, which again we've been able then to target residents, support and businesses. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Sue, for that. We do have a question. Councillor Roger Hayes has indicated. So, Councillor Hayes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And can I thank Sue for a very clear presentation of what isn't exactly a straightforward set of figures. But my question is really about the additional housing costs, which I don't totally understand what those are. Presumably also it will affect Bolton at Home, but this is presumably our own housing unit. Can you explain that a bit more, please, Sue?
Yeah, so it very much, there'll be lots of details in there around communications out to residents, but of course one of the things that we were very keen on doing is supporting the, you know, local residents who don't have a permanent place of residence, and we need to get them into some sort of accommodation. We can't have people in a pandemic, you know, living on the streets. It's just not appropriate at all. So there was a lot of additional effort that went into that, not only locally but also at the GM level as well. So that's predominantly the additional work that was done to try and get any resident that didn't have a permanent place of residence into some sort of accommodation on a long-term basis.
Okay, thank you very much. That helps.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Councillor Hayes. Councillor Heslop has indicated. Councillor Heslop.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you see me now?
I can't see you. Can you see Councillor Heslop?
No.
We can hear you anyway, Councillor Hasler.
Right, okay, then that's
good
enough. Just a couple of questions, Sue. One of them is the reserves took a £9 million hit for the 2021 budget. Have we got any idea of what is left in the reserves? And the second question relates to the support from central government for the council tax support of 3.45 million for this year. Is there going to be, has that been used? And will we be requesting any more money from central government to support the council tax support scheme? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of reserves, we don't know yet what we will have left at the end of the year. There is a long way to go, but what we do know, we started the year in total, it was about £137 million. That's everything. Now, obviously, you'll have heard me say this many times. Once we start taking out, we know what's already allocated, what's needed to balance the budget. I expect a significant reduction in that, but I can't give you a figure this early. In terms of council tax support, so the hardship fund will be applied back into residents' accounts who are on council tax support. So in effect, they will not need to pay any council tax in this financial year if they're paying the 12.5%. There unfortunately has been a delay in doing that because the system that we use had some quite significant technical issues in running the programmes to apply it. It wasn't just Bolton, this is a system that's used across the country. And so there's many authorities in the same boat. I think we are nearly there. We've been lobbying them extremely hard. We were due to upgrade the system. We very much said, well, that's not happening unless you get that sorted out, to put some extra pressure on them. But I think, subject to final testing, that will be going ahead. And in terms of are we asking the government for any money? Well, yes, of course. Everything is very gratefully received at the moment, and hence the monthly returns that do go into government is one of the key ways we do it. But also national societies. The treasurer of one of the Greater Manchester authorities actually chairs a national treasurers group at the moment, so has an ear of MHCLG. There is an awful lot of lobbying going on behind the scenes. It's not just local government, of course, it's every sector across the country at the moment. But I mean, I have to say it's been very welcome what we have got so quickly. Out of the government. It will definitely make a big impact in balancing the books this year, but of course if anything else is going to come down the line, that will be very gratefully received as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sue. We've now got Councillor Nick Peel who wishes to ask a question. Councillor Peel.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks again, Sue, for the presentation. You do make things quite clear that they're incredibly complex, because, as we know, local government finance is incredibly complex. And I just want to start by making it clear that the government nationally, in terms of the economic response to COVID, does need to be congratulated on many areas, in particular furlough, etc. There's a lot of other areas to do the response that can be discussed in other arenas, but yes, in times of national crisis, government intervention in the economy is always what people fall back on, and because it is proven to be worth work for the greater good of the country. But my fear is that, as we've seen since 2010, local government again becomes the Cinderella. My fear is that yet again it will be local government more than anything that's going to feel the backlash of an economic downturn. So there's a real worry there, and they did say that right at the beginning, they did say that no local authority will be worse off as a result of COVID. But I mean, we already know that is not going to be possible. that is a promise that the government made that they cannot fulfil. For instance, saying that we'll cover 75% of loss of earnings after your first 5% is an immediate admission that loss of earnings isn't going to be covered by the government. There's a lot of things, particular issues that face councils that I feel we're going to have to take a big hit on. In terms of that, my first question, I do have another question. In terms of that government support of 75% of loss of income after the first 5%, does that cover our airport income, Sue? And if it doesn't, can you perhaps explain why the government won't cover our airport income, which we, as everybody here knows, we depend upon in quite a big way?
Yes, we don't think it does. The government have been very clear around a differentiation between a sale, a fee, a charge for activities, a provision of a service, and a return from what they deem as a commercial investment. And obviously, as a shareholder in a large airport, that is deemed as commercial income. Now, the government have not, as I've seen, given any rationale. It may be out there, I haven't seen it. They haven't given us any rationale as to the differentiation between those two. But at the moment, our expectation is that they will not recompense us for any lost income due to that commercial investment within Manchester Airport.
Thanks for that answer. It doesn't surprise me, and I think it is quite sad, because it shows a lack of it's not a lack of understanding, it's a lack of recognition from central government that local authorities across the country have been innovative over the years in terms of how they protect services by bringing them in income through other methods. And because of that innovation, it's almost like we're punished for it, because there's no recognition that it is a crucial part of the council's income. And just to take that out of the equation, I think is wrong of the government to do that. I hope that that the council is lobbying on this particular issue, perhaps through GM. I only know what the situation is in Bolton. My second question is: it's been reported nationally, Sue, that there hasn't been a full take-up of the various grants offered to business to keep them afloat. I think it's definitely over $1 billion. I think it's around 1.2 billion. Might be between 1.2 and 1.4. It's around that mark. And what the Local Government Association is lobbying hard on is that money is distributed to councils to assist councils in helping businesses in their own way. But my understanding, and please confirm this, is those specific business grants are ring-fenced for this purpose, and if it's unspent, it goes back to the Treasury. So you've just confirmed that one. And the second question is: do we have any reason to believe that we have untapped businesses in Bolton who still might not be aware? The reason I asked that question is I dealt with some casework well into the business grant scheme from somebody who ran a small business. They'd applied for the business support grant, were not eligible, and I pointed out to them there's another pot called the discretionary grant pot. They applied to that and were successful. And okay, there's 100 reasons why people might not read a website properly when it's there in your face, but that just occurs to me that there may well be many small businesses, small entrepreneurs, people with few employees or even self-employed who haven't tapped in, because presumably 1.2 billion unspent, some of that must also apply to Bolton. I appreciate these are questions you may not be able to give full answers to.
I'll have a go. So in terms of our allocations, we got, I think it was about £61 million on the initial amount. So we've got 50, what did I say, 57 was it, out. So we've got a little bit unspent in terms of the first allocation. In terms of the second allocation, the 2.9, that's all gone. Every penny of that has been spent. Now, we've done an awful lot of comms out. There's been a lot of word of mouth. Business Bolton have been using all their contacts. We've had a lot of members really helpfully giving us contact details so we can follow up. So I would hope that everybody who was eligible has applied. There's a few who weren't, who applied as well, but you know, it's worth a go, isn't it? I think my plea would be to members that if you know of any businesses who haven't applied, who think they might be eligible, they need to do that now, because what we've learned today is that the government are closing the scheme at the end of August. So in terms of how long it takes for them, you know, to fill in the forms, it's a slick process, but then it comes into the team, they process it, get the payment out. Time is now running out, and the government have got quite a strong deadline on that closing. Yes, nationally, that I've seen reports myself in the, particularly for the discretionary fund, some local authorities saying we've had a handful and we've got it left. Now, obviously, we are administering a government scheme. It would need the government to tell us how they had changed the scheme with that unspent money for us to do something different. But if they did that, we would, you know, very welcoming, and then, you know, the systems are all set up there, and then off we go again, offering it to a different type of business that we weren't able to offer the support to on the first and second schemes.
Chair, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Councillor Peel, for your questions. Councillor Akhtar Zaman has indicated that he wishes to speak, so we'll go over to Councillor Zaman. Councillor Zaman.
Hi, thanks, Sue. Thanks for the presentation. We, not very long time ago, were told that reserves cannot be touched. It is surprising how things have changed in relation to reserves, but we are in unprecedented times, I suppose, and we have to accept things as they are. Now, Sue, could you help in terms of reserve levels for an authority of our size? What is the recommended figure from Audit Office or any other body that governs that kind of or that advises local government on those issues? What is the minimum requirement for us, if there is one?
So what the accounting requirements look at is your general balances. For us, it's 10.6 million we have at the moment, and what the auditors look at is a percentage of your turnover. Now, for us, I think the figure would normally be about 15 million. But because of the severe cuts that this council has faced for 10, 12 years, they are accepting that a figure of 10.6 in general balance is acceptable. For any other reserves, then obviously it's my professional judgment in terms of what we have and what it's allocated for and why we hold it. So, for example, your opening comment around reserves can't be touched. Now, for quite a long time, we have had about £20 million in our insurance reserve, and it is there because there are some risks that the council is unable to get external insurance for. So we build that up, and there's a lot of data behind that to say why we believe £20 million is the appropriate figure to have. Now, as we get through this financial year, what we're likely to have to do, I'll use this as an example, is to look at that £20 million and say, actually, we might need to reallocate some of that to be able to balance the accounts in this financial year. What does that mean in terms of the council taking additional risk? And is that a risk we are prepared to take? So it's a trade-off between taking more risk because we don't have the reserves to back it off, but also in terms of the reserves that we hold for specific purposes and for specific projects. Some of the challenges will be we need it to balance the books from the situation we're in. Therefore, this project, this initiative is no longer going to happen, and that is something that we will have to look at throughout this year in terms of understanding the total impact of what COVID is giving us. And then as we close the books, because as we all know, we legally have to produce a balanced set of accounts at the end of the year, which is why there's an awful lot of work going on in the background in terms of how we look at our reserves and also meet all the other challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis as a local authority. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you to Councillor Zaman. And Councillor Greenhalgh, the leader of the council, has indicated to speak. Councillor Greenhalgh.
Thank you, Richard. It was just on that point, and I just wondered if the Borough Treasurer would clarify, but certainly in the last Labour administration's budget, there was the use of reserves. I think in memory it was either 7 or 9 million reserves. I think it was the 9 million to allow for cash flow to defer some of the savings. I'm not criticising that. We'd said for a long time to use reserves, and the last Labour administration did it in a budget, and we're still putting out that last that 2-year budget that was put forward by the last Labour administration. So in actual fact, the reserves and many of the reserves that we're talking about now is actually a proposal to use those reserves for cash flow from the last Labour budget. So I don't know if the Borough Treasurer just wishes to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that is the case. Thank you.
Yeah, it's absolutely right, Leader. We've done it for a number of years, as members will be aware, a deliberate tactic, because back in the day we had proportionately high reserves, so it was a reallocation of them to allow us time to bring in the cuts in a proportionate and measured way, and also not have to do a very hard 1-year hit. So we've for many years done a 2-year budget and used our reserves to smooth in those cuts or defer them to future years in the hope that additional income would offset them. But yeah, absolutely right, Leader, a very deliberate tactic in managing the finances of the council.
Okay, thank you, Sue. No other members have indicated that they wish to speak. So could I thank you, Borough Treasurer, for your presentation. And now I think we're going to have a small presentation on the Chief Executive's Directorate.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So
okay.
as we move to the thank you. So as we move obviously to the normal thing that Scrutiny does at its first meeting, which is think about what it would like to scrutinise the Directorate over the forthcoming municipal year. I just wanted to give members a brief oversight of the department because there have been some changes, which is really welcome. So in a nutshell, this is me and my team. So now have 5 assistant directors. So Helen, as we know, is Borough Solicitor, Lee as Assistant Director for HR and OD, Phil, Revenues and Benefits, Customer Services, and then newly appointed 2 new names now for you, Emily Brooke, who will be joining us in October, and she will take over the portfolio for strategy and partnerships, and Andrew Williamson again taking over in October, and he will have the portfolio for transformation and ICT. So just go to the next slide, please, Callum. So this is what I look after, obviously the Directorate Leadership team, but in my role as Borough Treasurer, I've also got some direct heads of service, the corporate accounting team, the Exchequer Services, which is payroll and payables, Oracle procurement and internal audit and risk. So next slide, please. In terms of Helen, she has 5 service areas here. Very close to members' hearts, I know. So democratic services, elections, registrars, coroners, and last but certainly not least is our legal services team. Next slide, please. So Lee, newly appointed into the role of Assistant Director, has human resources, organisational development, and importantly our health and safety and wellbeing teams. Next slide, please. Phil, again, newly appointed into the role, looking after revenues, benefits and customer services. And as you can see in there, also importantly, in terms of the cash accounts receivable and welfare rights, and then the customer services area, contact centre, one-stop shop, and website digital development team also sits within that portfolio. So next slide. So Emily, she will be taking over portfolio for strategy and partnerships, which encompasses marketing and communications, which obviously has events in there as well, partnerships, performance, neighbourhood management, areas of working, linking into the Vision Action Group, Active Connectors, Prosperous Board, and the voluntary sector, and then also the corporate programmes, so looking after all our council policies, is everything in the right place at the right time and updated. Information flows through to GMCA, and also an oversight into our savings programmes as well. And then our final slide is Andrew. So Andrew will be picking up the challenge around all things digital, looking at how we use digital to transform the council, something that we've been very eager to do for quite a long time, as members will know from previous discussions at this committee, but also will take on the line management of the ICT team, because obviously in terms of transformation, you know, IT is the key enabler to do that, and he will also be then the interaction into the contract management with our partners Agilicis. So happy to take any questions and hand back to yourself, Chair.
Thank you, Sue, for that. Could members type speak into the chat box if they wish to ask a question? The only person indicating is our committee admin. Actually, Councillor Peel has indicated now, so I'll take Councillor Peel. Councillor Peel.
Sorry, Chair, I think Councillor Heslop indicated 707 for me.
Yes, Councillor Heslop has indicated just before you as well. It didn't come through on mine immediately. So Councillor Heslop.
Okay, third time lucky, hopefully. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sue. One of the persons that's going to be very important at the council, one of the officers, I should say, is the person that's in charge of sourcing funds from other places, namely from central government and say GMCA. Who is that person that will be in charge of sourcing funding and grants?
That very much sits across all directorates, because as you can imagine, there are so many different sources of funding available, not just from GMCA and government, but other local government organisations. So what we tend to do is have almost a council-wide approach to that, but to know what is going on, there are a couple of routes. So not least my finance teams, because they have the sign off through myself for all bids that go in, but also it links into each executive member's portfolio and the oversight of DLTs and CLTs. Now, clearly in the role for policy and partnerships and strategy, one of the things that Emily will be doing with her team is also being a source of information for where we see opportunities and pushing that out, but we don't centralise it in just one team. We spread that expertise right across the council. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Sue. So now we'll go over to Councillor Peel. Councillor Peel.
Thank you, Chair. Digitalisation. I was Councillor Sylvester's predecessor of Chair of Scrutiny, Corporate Scrutiny, and digitalisation was on our work programme. And in 2 agenda meetings I had with yourself, Sue, I agreed that I would put the digitalisation item back and then put it back again. And that was because the strategy that was being worked up by the council wasn't ready. We then had COVID hit us, and we've now appointed a assistant director who's going to take over that entire area. My question is, was the strategy actually ever completed, or are we bringing in a new assistant director and saying better start from the beginning and do it and come in with your own ideas? Because I hope it's not the latter, because if it is the latter, then you've got to ask yourself the question, what on earth have we been doing for the last 12 months on the digitalisation strategy, especially as we know that COVID has made this even more even more important for services.
Yeah, it's a fair challenge. I think what we've been doing over the last 12 months is pockets of really good practice, lots of learning, lots of good examples. What Andrew will be able to bring to us is joining that all up together, because I think what we've recognised is that we haven't really had the capacity for that strategic overview of IT, digital, new opportunities, new ways of working. So there have been people, not least in my IT team, who have been working so hard in terms of introducing new systems, looking at where we need new developments. But what they haven't had the capacity to do is take a step back and think about how that joins up better right across the council. So Andrew will be coming in and will be out talking to everybody and pulling together all those really good ideas and putting it into, taking that final step into that final strategic document, but with a really detailed work programme underneath it to say, this is what the future looks like, these are all the benefits, this if you need to spend some money, this is why and how much, but these are the outcomes that you will get from this strategy. And at that point, we will have in one place for the first time a digital strategy with an implementation plan, properly costed out, proper business cases behind it all, and really tangible benefits. I mean, you're absolutely right, you know, who'd have thought at the beginning of March that we'd be holding a meeting like this really successfully, but we've done it because we've had to, and I think it's probably given us that biggest step forward in terms of the digital way of working that we've had in a long time, so we can now build on that success and the confidence that everybody has in using technology in a different way. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Councillor Peel. I've got Councillor Muslim who has indicated. Councillor Muslim.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to just comment as well, Councillor Peel, because I know you've had this on the agenda when you were chair of this committee, and we in previous sessions discussed little bits of digitalisation as well. But I just want to say that the team's worked incredibly hard, especially over the past 6 months, and unfortunately, yes, things have not maybe progressed as quickly as we would like because of COVID, but that is just a challenge that all local authorities are facing. I'm quite confident that with Andrew coming in as a Director for Transformation, we really will get a good sense of direction of what we actually need to do as a local authority to improve our digital agenda and strategy. Coming from not really a local authority background, but from the private sector and bringing in some fresh eyes into what we do as an organisation, we're really useful to actually say, you know what, this is what I've seen elsewhere, and this is what will work in this organisation going forward. Of course, we have still been keen to try and do, as Sue's alluded to, different bits and where we can with IT. We've got members set up with laptops. We're using Microsoft Teams now, and there's further things coming with Microsoft Teams as well, where it'll be a lot easier for us to manage how we share files and agendas for committees such as this, and also just looking at other things we can be doing. It's worth noting as well that as we signed the local digital declaration last year, when I took on this role, we've this past week, in fact, actually secured our first lot of funding from that fund as part of the government's challenge to essentially find ways we can use IT and digital to sort of shape our services in a post-COVID environment, and we were successful in that round of funding, the first bid we've ever put in for that. So that's really great news, and that'll the funding that we've secured will help us develop a strategy for being a bit more digital in regards to the one-stop shop. And that will actually be something that we are looking at more generally as well, to make sure that we are as efficient and as also COVID secure as possible with that. So there is I appreciate it has been pushed back, and I'm no doubt that as we go through this municipal year, we'll come back to the topic of digitalisation, whereas I'm sure Andrew will be able to join us and give his thoughts as well. But it is still top of my agenda. But I have to say it's just been a bit difficult but recently. But I just thought it was important just to say that and also give you some confidence that it is still a big matter of concern for us and an area that we are looking to improve. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Muslim. So we've got Councillor Madeline Murray who's indicated to speak. So we'll go over to Councillor Murray.
Thank you for that. I haven't got a question. I'm just making a plea to Councillor Muslim and our new Assistant Director, Andrew Williamson, not to forget the wrinklies in this town and the people who are totally non-technical. So please don't leave us behind.
Sure, thank you, Councillor Murray. That's a very valid point that you make. So I don't think there's any more speakers. Actually, Councillor Muslim, have you indicated that you wish to speak again? Okay, so Councillor Muslim, do you want to reply? Councillor Muslim.
Thank you. Yes, it was just a real quick response to Councillor Murray's point there. Again, when we mentioned digitalisation in the past at this committee, I've been very clear that when we look at this agenda, we won't be leaving anybody behind. We've known throughout this crisis and before really that it's the elderly that do struggle with technology, and we're all about digital inclusion rather than digital exclusion. So please be rest assured that we will be looking to focus on making sure that all residents will be able to interact with the council in any way they want, but of course making sure that digital is a priority, but not turning anybody away from interacting with the council just because they are unable to access it or they don't know how to. But of course, we'll be looking at ways we can work, not just as a council, but perhaps the private sector to, upskill residents where we can, provide sessions like we already do in the libraries for residents to get involved and teach themselves a bit more about IT. But yeah, it is something that we are aware of, and we of course won't be looking to exclude any resident, no matter their age, about how they interact with the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I come back?
Yeah, yes, you can. You can come back, Councillor Murray.
Councillor Murray, you're on.
I'm on it now. See, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. And I would say I've not lost my faculties. They're going really bad at the moment, but there you go, because I'm stuck in the house. But please don't forget those that don't have computers or the library either. You just need to be a bit more cute in how you get those that fall through the net. But thank you for your reply anyway. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Murray. Thank you, Councillor Muslim. We've got the Leader of the Council who's indicated. Leader.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it's just a very small point, really, and just to totally reassure Councillor Murray that is one of the challenges of it. But just that I think often when we talk about digitalisation, we often think of it in terms of communication, whereas there are many digital initiatives that will absolutely help the elderly population, and not necessarily that they have to use them as communication tools or have to go on a computer to access them, but devices that will let their loved ones know that they're well or that they're in need of help that can be fixed. And there are so many digital initiatives out there that will ease and help the elderly not look after themselves, but to access help and various other mechanisms. And it's a whole host of those within the adults portfolio as well that we'll be looking at to see which will hopefully help and contribute to the lives of the elderly without putting the onus onto them of having to become computer literate or anything of that. It's about those digital initiatives, not necessarily having to get them on a computer to access it themselves. Thank you. Just a small point, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greenhalgh, for that. So I think it takes us nicely onto item 6, the committee work programme for 2020-2021, this municipal year. So Vicky, could you take us through this agenda item, please? What had occurred in the previous year and where we're up to, etc.
Yes, thanks, Chair. All I wanted to say was, obviously with COVID-19, the last meeting of the last municipal year didn't go ahead. So there was 4 items on that due to be considered by that meeting. So I would be proposing that these go forward for 2020-21. And then in terms of going forward, where we used to do workshops, what we've proposed this year is that members have any ideas they want members to scrutinise. Excuse me. If they could email me prior to the next meeting, and then the director will sit down with the chair and vice chair and come up with a proposed work programme for members to approve at the next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, members, does anybody wish to speak on this, please? We've got Councillor Peel, who's just indicated that he wishes to speak. So I'll take Councillor Peel.
Thanks, Chair. I think we coined the phrase that Councillor Murray just used, which made me smile. I think we have to be a little bit cute when we're looking at this, because I think the simplest thing to do is just to take the unfinished business from last year and pass it on. But that does not recognise that the world has changed massively around us. It has changed hugely. We definitely need some form of ongoing item. Maybe I'm not describing that well, but some form of ongoing report on the terrible financial situation that the council's facing. I suppose I'm almost asking for that to be a standing item. I think there's an area on the agenda which is quite vague. As the previous chair, I found it quite vague, and it's the areas around marketing. That obviously needs to metamorphosize really into the Big Up Bolton campaign that our own chief exec leads on as part of the vision agenda, especially with the economy and the way that transformation of the town centre may well be changing. And the other thing I would throw in there as an item that was forwarded was neighbourhood management. Now, again, these issues have become, they've changed, but they've changed in the way that become far more stark, because we know that COVID-19 has had a very disproportionate effect on areas of deprivation. There's a lot of people conflating and mixing this up with areas of high rates of BME populations. I think when you drill down into the figures, you actually find it's more linked to areas of deprivation. I think data from the northeast tells us that. So the only thing that needs to change about that, the neighbourhood management scrutiny presentation, is it really has to be more COVID focused. Now, I could talk, I'm sure members would not like me to continue talking, some would, some might not, for the next 15 minutes, but I would make an appeal to you, Chair, to really put that appeal out to members about, apart from the things I've mentioned, about things that on the corporate agenda that have changed, and therefore our work programme needs to change to reflect the changed world that we're in. So my ideas was an updated one on neighbourhood management, an updated one on marketing, and I think finance is so important, it is worthy of just one presentation during the year. I think we do need regular updates on it, and I think the corporate scrutiny is the appropriate body to do regular updates. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Peel, for that. Yes, I do agree. I think, as Chair, it should be a standing item on the COVID situation, and I take all your other points which you have made on board. So we'll go to Councillor Walsh, who has indicated to speak. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman. We heard earlier tonight fully how the authority responded to COVID and the tremendous work put in by officers. But I was reading the other day the fire services report on the queue and the way in which the authority had responded to that one and played its part in the aftermath of that event. I think it would be quite useful if members could have a full briefing on Gold Command and the structure that we have within the authority to deal with issues such as that, so that there is a full understanding of the important role played by the authority in issues which are beyond our direct control. That's one area that I think is worthy of careful scrutiny and would benefit members generally. And the other area that I think we ought to look at, and it is linked in large part to the consequences of COVID-19, and that is to look at some of the services that we have offered as, for want of a better phrase, trading services, and how those have been impacted upon, and B, how we might therefore change direction, do things in a different way to still provide services, to look at whether we provide the best arrangements for services, whether there are alternative providers of services, so that we can have some cost-centred accounting within the authority. And I'm a great believer in cost-centred accounting. I think it would serve as well to look at some of those trading services from Albert Halls through to the many other services that we provide. And I think that that sort of discipline would be quite useful for members. I offer two thoughts for two major areas of work that I think could serve scrutiny well in terms of bettering services for the public.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh, and I've noted those two suggestions down as well. I don't think any other members have indicated to speak. I just want to check with Vicky, our committee admin officer, if the Albert Halls falls under the remit of this scrutiny committee, or if it comes under the place scrutiny committee.
Yeah, Chair, I can confirm it comes under the place scrutiny committee. So if it's a particular area in relation to the Albert Halls, then place scrutiny committee. If it's about trading services across the council, I think it would come to corporate, and we've had it here in the past.
Thank you for that. Could I also check if this scrutiny committee deals with the community? We had a regular community safety presentation. I think annually. I think it's a legal requirement. Is it this corporate scrutiny committee that holds that annually?
No, Chair, it's the place scrutiny committee.
Oh, that comes under place as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Greenhouse, your leader of council, has indicated to speak, so we'll take Councillor Greenhouse.
Thank you. Far be it from me to suggest items of scrutiny. However, but I just thought two areas that are changing this year, just for committee's information, obviously, is post-COVID, how we deliver services from the one-stop shop might be something that that corporate wants to have a look at. Also, the way we issue grants now is completely different through the JSNA and through the CVS. And it was just actually on I know the community safety proposal goes to place. However, the teams of the neighbourhood community safety sit within and I know the Neighbourhood Watch came to corporate scrutiny last year. I just wonder, and it's a question really for Vicky as well, this, to obviously, as a result of COVID, I think many of us have seen a massive increase in antisocial behaviour and large groups of youth gathering, and we've seen in your area, Chair, quite emergency actions being taken place by the police. Police is under this portfolio. And I'm just wondering whether or not there are grounds for this corporate scrutiny to look at measures and give opinions on measures that can be taken for antisocial behaviour.
Thanks, Councillor Greenhouse, for that, and that's actually why I raised this issue if it came under this scrutiny committee, because of what had been occurring, especially in my ward in Horwich North East. So I just want to check with Vicky if that kind of topic can be covered on community safety under this scrutiny committee.
Yes, it can, Chair.
It can, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So I've noted that down as well. And Councillor Murray has indicated to speak. So we'll take Councillor Murray now.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad we've sorted that out, because I want to put the antisocial behaviour arising from nitrous oxide canisters as well. So that would be, because I know the police are trying to work on things like that. So I'd like to put that on the work programme as well, please.
Yes, I think that's a very important issue as well, because that issue is occurring all around the borough. So could I just check with Vicky as well? Could that issue with the nitrous oxide canisters, could that be part of community safety?
Yeah, it can, Chair. Yeah, we can bring them along to do a composite presentation from members on all the issues that are associated with community safety and crime and disorder. Great,
thank you very much for that. Now, does any other member wish to speak? There isn't anybody else indicating. I'll give you a few seconds to type speak in the chat box. Okay, nothing's come through. So thank you very much for those suggestions for the work programme. I think that concludes this meeting, therefore, because we've gone through the whole agenda. So could I thank our officers, one for hosting the meeting via this Teams, to the public as well, if you're watching online, thank you, and to all the members of the committee for attending this evening as well. So with that, have a good evening, everybody. I'll meet with the Vice Chair and officers, and we'll put a work programme together for this municipal year. So good evening, everybody.